Welcome to the Lionheart Podcast. My name's David Gustafson. I am your host. I am a positive intelligence coach. And this show is for high-achieving professionals who look successful on the outside, but they feel numb, anxious, and disconnected on the inside. If you grew up in a toxic or dysfunctional home and you now find yourself stuck in the same old coping strategies and patterns that no longer serve you, there is hope. You are not alone. There is a process you can grow the muscles and the capacities of joy and positivity and emotional regulation and resilience so you can be both successful on the outside and fulfilled in your relationships and in yourself. This podcast is a place for honest conversations about healing, about emotional resilience, about purpose, and what it really means to flourish, not just perform. Because you deserve more than just surviving. You deserve thriving and joy. So in this first episode of the Lionheart Podcast, we're gonna do, I think what we're gonna do every episode, we're gonna tell stories. And the story I wanted to start with was one when I worked at a company. This is several years ago, and well, I'll just dive into the story. So it was a regular day at work, and we all piled into the conference room for a call with the client. I was a mid-level manager at this company, and it was a normal, mundane check-in with the client to update them on the progress of their project. I had gotten this job because I spoke French fluently. I was pretty smart. I presented a professional and capable face to our clients and the dealer network. Like a lot of people at this company, I was smart, capable, and a good contributor to the company. And yet, I felt terrified. Going into this meeting, I was in a state of fight or flight, sense of urgency, terror mode. Everyone else was so much more capable, I thought. Everyone else was so much more calmer and more composed and more confident and more put together than me. The fearful inner critic was starting to go inside of me. It was saying, what if they see I'm not as capable as they think I am? What if I mess up and sound nervous and shaky when I speak? What if I stutter when I speak? What if they see that I'm not calm and composed and confident like they are? What if they see that I'm so different? That I'm a fraud? That I don't belong here because look at how I'm feeling inside, and they all seem like they're perfectly capable of managing their internal emotional experience in the midst of the work in a meeting and interpersonal dynamics and trying to solve the problems with the client. And for me, I was this mess on the inside. That morning, like most mornings, my brain was a frenetic mess of fearful voices and senses of urgency, and I was frantically cycling through all the things that needed to get done, processing all of the interpersonal dynamics of the office, and trying to prioritize like what should be done, trying to learn how to delegate to my team and account for everybody's different personality, all through this lens of fight or flight survival mode in a stressed state, not bringing my best self to all this really rich and nuanced process of being a manager within a company like this. I was highly emotionally dysregulated. The anxious doom scrolling through my mental fear feed was draining every last bit of my emotional energy. By the time I entered into that meeting, I was a frayed mess internally. But on the surface, in the meeting, I kept it together. I performed relatively well. We made it through. The crisis was averted. Another day was done. I maintained my reputation as a smart, capable employee, and I was being considered for a prominent promotion to a position that would feed my need for validation but also intensify these experiences of feeling incapable, of feeling stressed, of feeling like I was under the microscope. So how did I get to that place? When I was a kid, I mean, and that's, I think for so many of us, that's what it goes back to. Like, what circumstances in our life led us to develop in a certain way. And even though we don't need to get into the narrative of the story as much, what's really important is just recognizing the patterns. It can absolutely be helpful to share these things and dive into these things with ourselves and others. How did we get to this place? And for me, when I was a kid, the home I grew up in, the childhood I had was defined by the addictions of my parents. They were addicted to meth, crack, alcohol. I know now that this is an irresistible compulsion that is just the outward manifestation of extremely deep wounds. A desperate attempt to get these emotional needs met that have been thwarted through spiritual and emotional disconnect, through trauma. As Gabor Mate says it, I don't ask why the addiction, I ask why the pain. I was moved around 24 different times to aunts' houses. My sisters and I were moved around 24 different times. One time, how do I know that number? Because one time I was reviewing my history of this is after my recovery, after becoming an adult and doing a lot of this healing spiritual work, healing transformative work, and wanting to know, man, like where was that place? When did that happen? And realizing I didn't even understand like the full history of my own childhood. So I sat down and piece by piece tried to put it back together and like, okay, when my parents relapsed and disappeared that time, we had to go to my grandma and grandpa's house, and then we ended up staying there for many months or my aunt's house down in Kansas. I remember it was in Kansas, and we had to go there for a while. And so I went through piece by piece and finally counted it up. And we had lived in, well, I know I had lived in 24 different places. I think the number's pretty dang similar for my 3 older sisters. So that's how I know 24. I was moved around to 24 different places. My aunt's houses, people my parents met in 12-step fellowship meetings, foster care, homeless shelters, you name it, before I was able to move out on my own, before I was quite 17. I was still technically 16 when I went into independent living, which is a program here where you can basically be your own guardian legally before you're legally an adult. And that's where I wanted to be by the time I was 16. Through all of that, I was a straight A student. Teachers always adored me. I was an avid reader. I had found that I could receive love, validation, and stability through showing how smart I was, how capable I was, how much of a good boy I was. My natural strengths, being pretty smart, being capable, being creative, the natural strengths that every little kid has. Everybody listening to this, you have, incredible natural strengths that make you uniquely you. And for me, those natural strengths had to do with reading and achievement and being creative and being smart and wanting to build stuff. Being an industrious little guy. And I would get validation from that. In the midst of a very dysregulating, very toxic, very unstable, very insecure environment as I grew up, imagine that little kid is going through that instability, that insecurity. He's 6 years old, and he's already experiencing fight or flight survival mode dysregulation. He doesn't know where his parents are, if they're going to come home that day, where food's going to come from. Like, are him and his sisters going to have to figure out like where, how are they going to survive? How are they going to get to school? Because, that those kind of questions swirling around in a little 6-year-old's nervous system is highly dysregulating and highly disruptive, and it makes you feel like, God, I desperately want security, stability, love, connection, just to feel regulated and secure and accepted for just being and being who I am. I desperately want that sense of connection. And in that environment, in that state of being, imagine that you are reading a book and you come to your parents, and your parents are like, just like, and I remember these kinds of experiences, like where my parents would be like really impressed that I was reading this little excerpt out of the newspaper or something, and I demonstrated my intelligence as like a 6-year-old kid, and like I showed that I was intelligent, okay, and they would see that, and my parents in their dysregulated state, because they were constantly in fight or flight mode as well, and suffering the terrible condition of their addicted state of being, and through that, like, their love and appreciation and admiration of me being able to read that excerpt from the newspaper would pierce through. And they would be so impressed. And for that brief moment, we would share totally authentic, co-regulating, loving admiration and connection and appreciation. And that was like a balm for my wounded soul. That was like a balm for my wounded and hurting nervous system that was so dysregulated. It was like, that's what I need. That loving connection, that authenticity, that vulnerability, that love, that appreciation. That's what I needed. And so my little nervous system, so desperately wanting that love and that appreciation, that acknowledgement, like, burned into my memory and my nervous system. Like, what is the association? How did that happen? That happened when you were smart. And they were impressed. So like that association got burned into my nervous system over and over again for instances like that this seems like the only time that you get that feeling of love and appreciation and validation and authenticity is when you are smart, when you're capable, when you achieve. And so like that's how a essence gift, my sage gift, my natural strength got hijacked and became my survival mechanism. So as I grew, my identity, that is my understanding and my belief system of who I needed to be in order to survive and in order to get those emotional needs met, became that, like this belief system became that my only path to safety, happiness, ultimate fulfillment, and finally feeling loved and accepted was through achievement, accomplishment, being smart and capable. And I carried that unconsciously right into adulthood. And another thing that developed along with that was my understanding of these people that were high achievers, high performers, my examples of people like, that's who you need to be like in order to get that validation, that love, that acceptance. You got to be a high performer. You got to impress. You got to perform well. The people I saw that seemed like they were doing that really well were always calm, composed, and confident. Calm, composed, and confident. And so like that became a part of my requirement of myself if I was going to survive and get my emotional needs met, was to be calm, composed, and confident. And unfortunately, it's really hard to be calm, composed, and confident if you feel deeply unworthy, if you feel deeply dysregulated, if you are constantly anxious and stressed and flooded with cortisol and adrenaline because you believe that if you don't perform well, you're not going to get your emotional needs met. And if you don't get your emotional needs met, then like what's the point? What's the point? So it can be pretty damn hard to feel calm, composed, and confident in that state of being. And this was like a daily occurrence, a pretty much perpetual state of being in my professional existence, which of course impacted my home life and the experience of my own internal state of being constantly. This was a pretty much daily state of being for me. That whole story, everything I just described. And that was not sustainable. For me, this is what happened. This was the big turning point for me. I recognized I needed help. I was not feeling good. Like that was like kind of like the basic realization of like this sucks. I actually don't feel, the way I've been going about this whole life thing, like it's not going that great. This strategy, this survival mechanism of trying to get all my emotional needs met through achievement, capability, accomplishment, accolades, and validation, it was not working. I could absolutely see that I could not achieve my way out of this terrible sense of unworthiness and emotional dysregulation. So I began the journey of addressing these underlying emotional needs. And that first required actually acknowledging these underlying needs, which meant actually feeling the underlying needs of hurt, the pain, the wounds. To an extent, my survival mechanisms of seeking stability and security and validation and love and acceptance through achievement, a part of that meant that I suppressed and denied my emotional experience because the feelings of sadness would get in the way of my achievement and performance. Feeling dysregulated and uncomfortable and incapable and full of self-doubt gets in the way of my performance. So I developed this subtle habit, and this is still something I have to work on after all these years of work and healing that I've gone through, to just fully open up to experiencing these feelings, fully integrating my whole emotional experience into my consciousness as best as I can and welcoming it all in. That's still an ongoing process. And that's how it first started, was just acknowledging the hurt and the pain and feeling the hurt, the pain, the wounds. Ironically, this opening up of my heart to myself was a great act of self-empathy. And when I open up my heart to myself in deeper self-empathy, it automatically creates a deeper capacity for empathy for others. Those of us that have experienced traumatic childhoods or traumatic experiences are already capable of deeply empathizing for others' pain. Like a lot of us that have gone through those traumatic and difficult and dysfunctional experiences, I feel, have a deeper capacity for empathy for others that have gone through experiences like that. We know, like when we hear of someone that has gone through, is going through something really terrible at home, whatever that happens to be, we on some level know what they're going through. The level of dysregulation, the level of instability, the feeling like the bottom's going to drop out, the whole fight or flight response that, if you haven't gone through that, then you don't know what that's like. And so like when you do know, that's like built-in empathy. For an instant at least, like when you hear of somebody else going through something terrible, there's an energetic opening up to sharing that emotional experience with them And that is the essence of empathy, like sharing that emotional experience. You're not trying to fix, you're just seeing, witnessing, acknowledging, sitting with. That's empathy. And there's incredible transformative power in empathy. So ironically, the opening up of my heart to the pain, the wounds, it led to this very sweet and even blissful grief, like truly feeling the grief, like stopping the suppression of the hurt and the pain and the sadness and actually feeling it instantly starts to transform it into true grief. And grief is one of it's a quote unquote negative emotion, but it's negative because it does feel sad, but it's a sage, highly evolved, positive part of our nervous system and process, because it's an expression of love. It's an expression of love. And when you finally sit with and feel those feelings of sadness and have experienced it like it's grief, you're expressing love for that thing that was lost. And for me, the thing I started to express love for was the loss of a good childhood, of all the times that I lost out on the experience of feeling cared for and loved. And the healing part of that was that in doing that, it's like I was doing that for myself. It's like I was retroactively going back and loving that kid and giving him what he needed that he wasn't getting at the time. And that's why grief feels like, to me anyway, like it's got this sweet, blissful aspect to it, because you're finally honoring that thing that you love and that thing that you're mourning. So beginning this process, it opened me up to an emotional and spiritual alignment that was like loving sunlight on my face that energized me in pretty quick, man, like starting this process and feeling that sunlight, that awakening, it gave me this zest for life, for healing. It's like here's this inkling of like, wow, there's this whole other dimension to life that I've been neglecting, this emotional healing development dimension to life that I'd just been unaware of, in a way. And the waking up to that, in a more deeper, because obviously like I'd been an emotional being before that and had gone through a lot of, spiritual development and journeying before that. But like this was a pivotal time when I was at that meeting, at that company, and going through these doldrums and dysregulated state of not understanding, like, why is it so hard to just feel okay in the midst of productivity? And like that pivotal moment when I finally started to feel like, oh wow, healing is possible. Healing is possible. That gave me this zest for life, this zest for this process, for development, for growth, for transformation, and for contributing to others. That's what's really cool about this work, that shows me that it's something inherently good. Like it's cosmically aligned in such a way to like work with the universe in a miraculous way that when we start this work, we spontaneously want to give. We spontaneously want to contribute to the world in a better way, which is really freaking cool. Like we're no longer so fixated on getting what we need and which is it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. So that is when I learned that one of the prerequisites for joyful, loving living is being willing to acknowledge and experience the pain, the sadness, the hurt, the woundedness, the shame, the unworthiness. One of the prerequisites to living a joyful and loving life is to acknowledge and experience the pain, the sadness, the hurt, the woundedness, the shame, the unworthiness. As Joe Hudson is a coach from California. I heard him on a Coaches Rising podcast, and I'm pretty sure that he just came up with this, but it's not even a quote. I don't want to call it a quote. It's a verse that he shared, and it speaks directly to this process of fully experiencing all of the tough aspects of the emotional dimension of life, fully, courageously experiencing and welcoming in all of it. He says, joy is the matriarch of the whole family of emotions. All those emotions are joy's children. All of those emotions are joy's children. And she won't come into a house where any of her children aren't welcome. Joy is the matriarch of the family of emotions, and she will not come into a house where any of her children aren't welcome. So now, as a positive intelligence coach, I've made it my mission in life to support others in their evolution, in their awakening process, out of that morass, that bitter morass of dysregulation. So I'll end with a story of how this has shown up in my life. So recently I had a meeting. It was scheduled for 3 hours, but it ended up going for 6 hours. So juxtapose this experience with how I used to be, that even a meeting of 1 hour was insurmountable, because the way I used to be, I was carrying all of that stress, that frenetic, frayed, stressful, mental doom scrolling, dysregulated fight or flight mode, like totally in survival mode, which unfortunately the anxiety of in survival mode, it makes you like hopelessly self-centered. And I couldn't get into any kind of flow state of energetic sharing and collaboration with other people. So I could barely last half an hour in a meeting before I was freaking done. And so juxtapose that with scheduling a meeting for 3 hours. We're going to do this thing for 3 hours. So we scheduled this meeting. We were going to workshop something for my business. And we ended up going for 6 hours, like nonstop. The meeting was energetic. Our creative juices were flowing. There was a beautiful balance in the contribution. There was a flow state of collaborative idea sharing and discovery. I felt passionate and joyful, and there was no fear about being good enough, about others approving of me, about accomplishing enough. Occasionally, the small voice, the inner critic, the dysregulation would pop up, and the small voice would say, "You're sounding stupid. What's wrong with you? Nobody wants to hear from you. Listen, do you hear your voice? Your voice sounds stupid. What's this stuff that you're coming to? You think anybody's going to want to hear about this?" And I would hear these words, and I would hold them. I'd use these new muscles of joyfulness to momentarily, just for a second, welcome in the subtle fears and wounds, and welcome them in, and feel them in my throat. I'd feel that constriction in my throat, and I'd recenter, and I'd hold them in empathy and love. And I'd say, this too is welcome. This too is welcome. This too is a part of the family of joy. And I welcome the children of the family of joy into my life. And then I would re-engage in joy and reconnect with the meeting and the process. And the result of that was not only was I able to get through 6 hours of a meeting, but man, I was energized and fired up. And that is something I access. That is a state of being I access many days, and working towards just living that way constantly. And I'm definitely not there yet where I'm like living there constantly. I don't know if anybody ever does on this plane of existence. But I'm growing the muscles to be there more of the time. And that's what I help my clients do, is grow the muscles to be in that state of joy and positivity and expression of their gifts more of the time. So anyway, joy is the matriarch of the family of emotions, and she will not come into any house she is not welcome. So thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and I would love to connect with you. Seriously, I would love to connect. Find me on the socials or go to my website, lionheartcoaching.org, and you can email me or follow me on the socials, and we can absolutely connect that way. Please leave a comment on it or a rating on whatever platform that you're listening to this on. And if you would do me a huge favor, and if you can think of somebody that would resonate with this message and this teaching and this type of podcast, if you could share this with them, I would really appreciate it. So thank you so much for listening. My name's David Gustafson. I am a licensed positive intelligence coach. I am with lionheartcoaching.org. I'm very grateful that you've listened to this, and I just want you to know, if any of it resonated with you, if you feel like you are holding parts of yourselves at arm's length, if you feel like you're doing it all alone, then I'm here to tell you, you don't have to do it alone. At lionheartcoaching.org, you can go there to find some tools and resources for the next gentle step in your own healing and recovery. I would be honored to walk alongside you in this path.